event.
Awesome.
I am going to pull up this screen so I can see you. Woo! All right. All right. So everybody is hopping on, and thanks everybody for your patience with our technical difficulties. We fail forward in this era as much as we can. I am super excited tonight to introduce you to my mentor in all things chiropractic, methylation, biochemistry, life. Really helped me to get on the path to heal myself. So I'm Dr. Kat. I'm pediatric and prenatal chiropractor. Welcome to the wellness community where we are hosting this event this evening with the famous and infamous Dr. Monica Berger. And to me, she's like a female Ben Lynch, but better because she's a chiropractor. And tonight, we're going to be talking about how well you wear your jeans. So just if you haven't read the bio already, go back and read the bio because I don't want to take any of the time that we have to have her speak with us tonight. And then I'll buzz out a little bit. She has a lovely presentation for us on how well we wear our jeans. And this is a message of hope. This is not a message of doom and gloom. This is an opportunity for us to learn about different things that we can do to change the expression of our genes and learn that it's not just about MTHFR. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll feel empowered to know that at the very least, there are some tools like nutrigenomics and other things that I'm sure Monica will touch on. This isn't product specific. This isn't anything specific. It's not company specific. Monica is a mentor to a lot of us in the chiropractic profession. Chiropractors who are listening tonight, please make sure that you follow her on Intersect for Life. And we can get you connected to her for some codes, for some seminars and so forth. But in the meantime, for the lay population, I'm going to now turn this over to you. I'm so happy you're here with us this evening.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Kat. And I appreciate all those kind words, but I feel the same about you and many others that I know that are in this community. So I just like sharing my message. So let's dig in a little bit. I'm going to share my screen if that's cool with everybody. And I do have a bad habit of talking a lot. So I will try to keep this interesting and light and not too lengthy. So how about that, you guys? So everybody, thank you and welcome out there to all of you. And this is exactly what Kat said. I want this to be a message of hope, not a message of despair, okay? Especially the times we're living in right now. So we'll touch a little bit on that. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been in practice for 29, going on 30 years. And the reason I do what I do is because when we get the foundational steps of what true health is, it is quite profound. And first of all, this is me. I was hit by a car when I was 5 and ended up in the hospital for several months. And then thereafter, I was in a body cast. And you can see the floral print on that lounge chair. So I spent about 6 months recovering from being hit as a pedestrian from a car accident. And then I started working very early on when I was 11 in a, of all things, please don't judge me, but we grew up not with a lot of money. And so I grew up working on a shooting range and was exposed to a lot of lead shot and toxins in that manner. And while I would be outdoors working on this shooting range, crop dusters would be flying over and spraying the crops around where I was working. And I did this for, several years. And so I grew up from this point forward, till my late 30s, maybe even early 40s-ish. I know you guys probably think I'm still 24, but that's just a farce. So I'm healthier now heading into my 60s than I was in my 30s and 40s. And so this is just some of the things I had: headaches, migraines, asthma, allergies, eczema, PCOS, endometriosis, uterine fibroids, PMS, hypothyroid, depression, amenorrhea. I didn't have a menstrual cycle till I was 26. And that was only because I came under the care of chiropractic care. So that was a very pivoting time for me. So my message is, if I had all this growing up and I was able to shift and turn the tide for myself, most certainly you can do the same. And my genetics, I came to find out, are not the best, but it was really the toxic and stress load that I grew up with that was the big tipping point for me. So I just want you to understand that those of you out there that are struggling, please never give up hope. But we're going to touch on some things you can do and the control you do have. So I'm going to go back to this. It says how long you and your children and your grandchildren, what their life is going to be like depends increasingly on the understanding of the human genome and how that human genome can be expressed. So let's go there. So true or false? Your genes will define your health. I can't see hands out there. I wish I could. I'm a real visual kind of person, but that is, for the most part, not true. And we'll go as we go through this presentation, we'll find out why. But so many people say, well, it's in my genes. You know, my parents had Alzheimer's or my diabetes or thing. I had all that. All that runs in my family. Diabetes, Alzheimer's, strokes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. I mean, and with my parents and my siblings. So it's a very close, it's not very many generations away. So, but it doesn't have to define us. And I made very key critical decisions early in my life that I am not going to be, not going to define my health. I'm not going to have those issues. Although I grew up with all those health issues to begin with, right? So I want to the Human Genome Project came into play and we got some great information from that. And this is how it kind of all turned the tide for us in being able to understand genes. A gene, we used to freak out about genes. You know, oh my gosh, it's a genetic thing. We're not tied to those genetics, and we'll talk about that. Then we moved into what we call the Human Microbiome Project, the study of the gut function. And we term the gut the second brain. 80% of your immune system is in your gut. So this is a very key thing to know and understand because it will affect your genetic expression, hands down. So what you put in your mouth affects your gut, and that will affect your genetic expression. And now we're into what we call the human connectome. That's the study of the circuitry in the brain. And all three of these come together to make or break your optimum health paradigm. Okay? So epigenetics, what are epigenetics? Epi means above. Our little kiddos, our little fiddle farts, this is because our epigenes are influenced from generations back, actually. We'll talk about that. And our kiddos should be growing up and be able to morph in these beautiful butterflies and as we become adults and continue to express ourselves fully and wholly. But if we have blocks in our epigenes, if we have stressors that change our epigenetic patterns which in turn will change our genetic expression. And those stressors are trauma, toxins, thoughts, and now we have to add in today's world, technology. So we don't have to be hardwired and live by our genetic makeup. We have the power to control the way those genes express themselves if we can control our stressors. So there's three key points I want you to kind of take away. Our genes can either be, they're going to be a result of our stressors, our trauma, toxins, thoughts, technology. I say processed foods and unprocessed emotions. Processed foods in and of themselves have a whole plethora of issues. One thing being, most of them contain a thing called folic acid. And we'll talk about folic acid. It's a synthetic form. It is very hard for any human, a healthy person, to break down and utilize. So we want to look at alternatives in the natural state, in the natural form called folate. So these processed foods can block our genes from expressing themselves fully. And emotional blocks. And in the chiropractic world, we talk about what we call subluxations, micro stressors on the spine that can cause stressors within our nervous system. And this can keep us, we don't get the correct messages from the body to the brain. And you may think, oh, that's no big deal. However, this can keep us in a state of what we call fight or flight. And we're going to talk about when we're in these stressed out states, like many people are in right now, unfortunately, we can deplete key nutrients. Our whole metabolism goes off, our hormones go off, our neurotransmitters, those are chemicals in the brain. Key nutrients that are needed to run our genes, to help our genes function, can be depleted. And when that happens, we can have jams in our genetic expression without having a mutation. Okay, so we'll get to that. So genes can be either become our protectors and partners in our wellness. We can foster them to work as healthy as possible, or they can cause us to not be able to express ourselves wholly and healthy. And we can make choices every single day on how well we support our genes so that they can express themselves as healthy as possible. One of the things we have to understand, we used to talk about GIGO. And those of you, I like to say, raise your hand if you know what GIGO is. GIGO in, garbage out. We take garbage in, can we detoxify those toxins and get that garbage out? Unfortunately, these days, it's a lot of garbage in and garbage in. It doesn't get out. And a large part of that is because our microbiome, our gut, is shut down. How do we detoxify? Through skin, through lungs, and through poop. If you're not pooping, you're not detoxing. So that will back up our ability for our genes to work properly. And since World War II, we've had over 87,000 chemicals allowed to go carte blanche in this country. They have not been vetted. They have not in single form been tested enough to see what their influence is on the health and human wellness, let alone tested when they're all put together. And so again, we talk about the total load. What is the total load on the system? How full is the bucket of toxins? Processed infant formulas, starting from infancy on, we see that we can have toxic loads. And we've seen this in prenatal, the umbilical cord of moms, of pregnant moms, and the toxic load. Then we add infant formulas. We add, again, nutrient deficient foods. And we add the folic acid that was actually put into play in the 90s in order to help specific developmental birth defects, but it also has its consequences. It's like a truth or consequences kind of thing. Neurotoxins in our food. MSG, monosodium glutamate. And monosodium glutamate has many different names. So don't be fooled if you see a product that says no MSG. In fact, there's a great website. It's msgmyth.com. And it tells you all the different names for MSG. And the reason, why is MSG? MSG can jam a biochemical pathway called the transsulfuration pathway. And this pathway is part of the methylation paradigm. And so if one cycle's off, all cycles can be jammed, can be affected. Dyes, preservatives, and the big one on the docket we like to look at is glyphosates. Glyphosates are in Roundup. Glyphosates are known to strip a lot of nutrients. And we're going to see how those nutrients are so key in helping run our genetic code, our genetic expression. And then we have things like vaccines and other medications that deplete methylation. So the moral of the story is we want to try to build a life minimizing these toxic exposures. So I want to talk a little bit about our epigenetic inheritance, what we call transgenerational inheritance. This is emotional expression that's pulled down from generation to generation to generation. And we know that this comes back as about as far as 14 generations down. Methylation is said to be wiped clean at conception. Methyl groups are added at the time of conception. However, what we found in neuroscience is methyl imprints that come from emotional traumas, emotional experiences. Those don't get wiped clean at conception. Those are hand-me-downs from our ancestors that stay within our methylation DNA. So they did a study with male rats, and they gave them the smell of cherry blossoms, and then after that, they give them an electrical shock to see how they would respond to that. And they responded with a stress response, obviously. And that stress response increased this, what we call cortisol, that puts us in fight or flight. They bred those rats. They gave the offspring the smell of cherry blossoms with no electrical shock. What did they see? They saw the same stress response as their fathers. They bred those rats, so this is second generation, gave them the smell of cherry blossoms. They had the same stress response. So what we're seeing is the stress response of our ancestors are programmed into us. We don't need to stay in that program. There's ways we can get out of it, and we won't touch on that tonight. That's not what we're here for. But my message is our stress responses to environment, to experiences, can keep us in a stressed out paradigm, which will alter our biochemistry and deplete us of key nutrients and key metabolic functions. And that in and of itself can lead a gene to act like it has a mutation, or what we call a SNP, even though it doesn't. So we have to keep that in mind as we move forward. So what is a gene? Okay. A gene is an enzyme. It's a protein. We used to freak out about genes. Oh my gosh. Okay. A gene has to do some work. It either works to make something that we need, that we critically need for our body to function as healthy as possible, or it works to break down, to modulate the levels of certain things we need, like chemicals in our brain, serotonin and dopamine. So that's what a gene does. It's a worker bee. Okay. We have to give it support so it can do its work, whether it has a mutation or not. It needs to have support. It needs to have an assistant, a co-pilot. So why would a gene go on strike? Why say, I'm full, I don't want to work anymore, or I don't want to work that hard? Because of the stressors imposed upon it. Like we talked about, trauma, micro trauma. You're sitting at your computer all day and you're sitting with bad posture and repetitive stress on your spine and your nervous system. Okay, macro trauma, you got hit by a car. Emotional trauma, like we talked about. Toxins, what we breathe, what we eat, the toxins in our clothing, the flame retardants. We're exposed to a plethora of toxins every day. Our thought processes, how we think, how we perceive, how we react to situations, which is a little tough one right now. And now we have to add in technology and EMFs, and that's a whole nother load in and of itself. The moral of the story is, when you're under more stress, the demand for methylation, for methyl groups, is going to be higher. When you're on a beach in Hawaii, relaxed, no worries, your demand is not going to be that high. And we have to understand these waxes and wanes of need for the body. Because when we talk about supplements are supplemental. We don't need the same ones all the time, every day in the same amount. It depends on what your body, the flux of your body. And that's why it's good to work with a practitioner that understands all these intricacies. Perception of your stress. How well, is your threshold for stress low? Is it high? It depends on the situation. Diet, lifestyle. These are all things we call allostatic load. How much of a load the body has on it that it has to work to adapt to this load. The longer it works, the longer it has to try to keep these stressors under check, the more of a breakdown that happens. And then we just can't handle that load anymore. And then we get signs or symptoms. And in fact, most diseases start about 20 years before we get the label or the symptoms start. So it's really important that we understand that we minimize the amount of stress in our bucket before we get signs and symptoms, to help the train not go off the train tracks, to not derail. So I talked a little bit about our response to stress. I refer to these as behavioral SNPs. If we're constantly in a stressed out mode and running from a tiger when the tiger is not there, when we're stuck in what we call a fight or flight mechanism or a freeze mechanism, we can also be, a lot of people understand fight or flight, and that cranks up these things called adrenal glands, and your cortisol level goes through the roof. Cortisol will block different of these pathways, of these biochemical pathways. But we also have a freeze and dissociate response. It's like an animal, like a turtle, when maybe the prey is after them, they want to go into their shell and hide. That's just as stressful as running from the tiger. So don't mistake that person that's kind of chill and goes into themselves and is kind of quiet as being relaxed and in a non-stressful status, because in fact, they can be in a stressful status. And again, this can lend itself to a gene being so stressed out that it cannot express itself fully. So not all genes have great significance. Some have more power or work and play more importance than others. There's some genes that when they do have a mutation, and a mutation is simply, we get one gene from mom, one from dad, right? Makes a pair here, and they need to be placed properly. And when one or both aren't, when they're kind of flipped, called transcribed, this doesn't allow that gene to work as significantly, as much, as hard as one that's not transcribed. Some genes where we see, severe birth defects or so forth, those genes, we can't really change the expression too much on those. But most genes, if we give them support, we can help them work around their deficits. If I have one gene, everybody wants to talk about MTHFR, okay? Let's just put it out there. You see all that roadmap stuff in the background? That's more of our biochemistry. The Human Genome Project showed us that there's between 20 and 25,000 different genes in the body. So it's not just MTHFR. She doesn't act alone. She doesn't live alone. There's more genes than her. Okay? She has a lot of power, so to speak, because she makes a thing called folate, which is critical for many, on a cellular level, for many reasons. A gene, again, works to make something. The only function of MTHFR, her only function, her responsibility is to make folate. That's what she does. She makes folate. Folate just happens to be a very important nutrient that we need for many reasons. So if you have a gene and there's one transcription, there's one SNP, we call that heterozygous. One copy, you got one bum rap from either mom or dad. If we have two of them, mom gave us a bad one, dad gave us a bad one, it's called homozygous. Of course, if you have both of them, that gene struggles to function. Its capability is less than if you just had one or none. Now, the place on the gene also can be important. I call them parking spaces. So we've seen the DNA helix. Let me go back. So we've seen the DNA structure, and then the bars that connect each side. I call those parking spaces. On different genes, certain parking spaces are more important than others. So those of you that are on this to hear about MTHFR, okay, what do I do? What's it about? We can have a SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism, or a mutation on a parking space they're all numbered. That's why you see all these numbers. It's the C677. The other one that we look at in regards to MTHFR is the 1298 parking space. So on the 677, if we have one flop, one mutation, Miss MTHFR struggles by working by about 40% less. If we have both of them, we got a copy from mom and from dad, it can be upwards of 70 to 80% less of a function. But don't stress, breathe, everybody, because we can support that by minimizing the stressors on her and by giving her some nutrients to help support her. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, if you have one mutation on that parking space 1298, they say it's about a 20% deficit. And if you have two on the parking spot of 1298, it's about a 40% deficit. Now, to throw a wrench in everything, you can have one mutation on the 677 parking space and one on the 1298. And we call that compound heterozygous. You got one of each. That happens to be my genetic configuration for MTHFR. And I am a genetic mess, okay? I've got a lot of genetic SNPs. But I don't let that rule me. I learn how to take care of myself to foster the best internal and external environment to keep the stress off my genes. Now, just for simplicity's sake, for the most part, it's thought that I don't know, Kat, can you see my mouse, my pointer?
I can, yes.
Okay, so hopefully they can out there.
Hopefully.
So it is thought, and this is just a very general rule, that from this point forward and into here, if you have a 677 SNP mutation, it will affect most in this direction of your methylation cycle. And in the 1298 will affect mostly over here where we see our neurotransmitters. So oftentimes you might see, but remember, everything spins together. It all works off of each other. It's one big assembly line system. So it's not that cut and dry. But it's said that those with the 677, they might have more tendencies towards things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancers and those kind of things. You don't have to have those, though. You don't have to end up with those. And with the 1298, it tends to show up more as emotional, mental struggles. Okay? But we don't have to live there because we can get the required assistance to help us out. We can take the stress off the system, trauma, toxins, thoughts, technology. We can practice mindfulness and exercise and eating right and changing our thought patterns. And we can give the gene what it needs to run. So we'll stick with MTHFR because everybody loves MTHFR. But MTHFR needs a nutrient called B2, called riboflavin. That's her assistant to run properly. Just like those of us need assistance in our offices and in life, okay, to run more efficiently. So if we give our genes the assistant it needs to run as properly as possible and take the stress off of it, we don't have to be deemed with a genetic code that we see maybe our ancestors, okay, with those kind of associations with those kinds of illnesses. And that's where the power comes in. Understanding this and working with practitioners that understand this, you can carve out workarounds and support mechanisms to allow those genes to function as healthy as possible. That is the cool news. Okay. Other key factors. So other key things we need to run methylation in general, make sure I'm not going too long here, is things like zinc and iron and key nutrients that are made in the gut. So again, we want to address the foundation, the gut. So our epigenetic stressors affect methylation, and our methylation affect gene expression. And methylation will affect brain function, DNA repair, fighting infections, get rid of toxins, supplying us with key nutrients, everything we need to be as healthy as possible. And again, it's tied with a lot of, almost any condition can be tied with methylation defect. A big one that is out there these days are what we call lip ties and tongue ties. And the reason we might be seeing those more on the rise is because we're seeing more stressors on the rise. Okay. So again, we don't have to carry or get these labels. So what is a mutation? It's again, a change in our DNA sequence. It alters our DNA sequence like we talked about, and not getting to the end product it needs to make or to regulate. So fact versus fiction. I'm going to move my screen here. Hang on. I'm going to get out of here for a second only because, so You need specific medications or food or supplements if you have a gene mutation. No. Okay. There's no cookbook recipe. You never treat a gene. You treat the person in their entirety. Okay. You treat the mind, body, spirit, chemically, physically, emotionally. Okay. And everybody's different, and everybody responds to supplements different, and everybody responds to foods different. But again, that's why you have amazing practitioners out there that can help you through this. Fact versus fiction. If you have an MTHFR mutation, you have to take B12 and folate. First of all, you don't want folic acid because that can make things worse. And you might not need folate, okay? Folate it can be very difficult to handle for some people. Methyl groups in general can be very difficult to handle for some people. Some people tank when you give them supplements. So you need to understand that if you take something, this is a common scenario. I have MTHFR, so I heard I need to take B12 or folate, and you take it and you don't feel any different, or you feel worse. But you think if you take more, you're going to feel better. But more makes you feel worse. It's because methyl groups are extremely, extremely powerful, and they can work very fast in a good way and very fast in a bad way. So understand that it's not cookie cutter and it's not one size fits all. There's 3 different forms of B12. One is a methylated form. A lot of people can't handle methylated forms of nutrients. They feel worse. One is to support what we call your mitochondria, your energy powerhouses of your cells. One is to help support more oxidative stress. So it's important that we understand we base nutrition based off your individual biochemistry. I'm trying to read my slides are being blocked by my picture here. So hang on a second. I can't see my fact versus fiction here. Hold on, everybody. Mutations cause, read it to me, Kat.
All MTHFR mutations have the same possible health consequences.
No. And we talked about that. It depends on your stress load, depends on where in the gene it's stressed, where it's mutated. There's a number of factors, so no. And again, that's why we look at individualized markers, individual biochemistry, and the stressors that are on that particular person. Okay. Read that one to me, Kat.
If a person has MTHFR mutation, it must be treated?
No, we never treat the gene. We never treat the gene. We treat the person. Okay. So again, there's over 20 to 25,000 different genes. MTHFR doesn't work alone. She has a lot of other genes she talks with. And again, a lot of other substrates or nutrients she needs. Okay. Just because you have a mutation doesn't mean it's expressing itself. It doesn't mean that you need to do anything. You can simply start laying a good foundation. We refer to the 4 foundational rooms. One is the poop room, so clean up your gut. The other one is your sleep room, getting enough sleep. Your blood sugar and adrenal room, which is incredibly important, and oxygen. Getting good at oxygen too on a cellular level. So support the foundation and then see if you need any more than that. Okay. Genetic testing is always expensive and out of reach for most people. Not so. There are a lot of alternatives, and you can talk to your healthcare practitioner on that. But now there's a lot of companies out there that are very affordable. And what I wanted to kind of bring home to you is we talk about the 3 M's. Methylation, mitochondria, your little energy powerhouses of your cells, and your metabolism all spin together. They all spin off of each other to create the most the most optimal functioning of your biochemistry. For example, metabolism has to do with your thyroid gland. MTHFR, again, we're going back to her. I'm just picking on her because so many are interested in her, but there's, like we said, many other genes. She relies on a good functioning thyroid. One of our thyroid hormones is called T4, because T4 will give you the B2, the riboflavin that MTHFR needs as an assistant. So we can't just look at genetics. We need to look at the whole systems. Methylation, mitochondria, and metabolism all spin together. So I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. I always like to talk about how congested is your highway? How much stress do you have on your system? In this picture right here, we see 8-ish lanes of highway, open highway, a few cars on them. That's kind of analogous to not having any mutation. Okay. Second, the middle picture, we're down to 4 lanes. That is analogous to having 1 SNP. Okay. The capacity for that function goes down. And the picture with 2 lanes, that's analogous to having 2 SNPs. Harder to function, harder to work. Less stress, less cars, less traffic that we can put on the system. But if we jam the system with a lot of trauma, toxins, thoughts, technology, poor food choices, not enough sleep, too much stress, on and on, everything that we touched on, it jams our freeways. And this is where we run into trouble. We can have no mutation at all, no mutation, but we're jamming the system. Of course, it's going to act like you have double mutations. Same thing with the middle picture, and same thing as though you would have you would have a double configuration here. You're jamming the system. So I need to ask you, how well do you wear your genes? How congested are your freeways? What are your stressors? So what we want to do is we want to look at individualized, personalized care to maximum your well-being, de-stress as much as possible. And with that said, you can live an optimum, functional, happy, healthy life, healthier in your 60s than when I was in my 30s. Not quite at 60 yet, but you know what I'm saying. Again, it's all about supporting the foundation and supporting your genetic, to your optimal genetic expression. So with that said, I think I kept it on the right timeline. Almost went a little bit over, sorry. And if you want to follow me, that's a good place to get resources at. If you're a Chiro out there, that's a good place to get resources at. I don't know if there's any questions or anything.
Well, I just wanted to thank you and say that, like, I mean, I could listen to you forever. And I just wanted to say that, like, it's so good to know that by reducing our stress, like our oxidative stress, our toxic stress loads, and so forth, which is kind of at the heart of our community, we can hack our genetics on a certain level. Of course, our lifestyles, et cetera, are very important. No, but I think that was really great. I was looking to see if there were any questions, and I don't see any. I think everybody's just absorbing everything. So I am so grateful for you, and I am going to stop the recording and end the meeting, and we'll stay on a second, Monica.